Cathy. No, Cathy, how are you doing today?
Hi.
All right, so we're going to be telling some stories a little bit about your political career as well as being connected with Jim Beatty.
Mhm.
So why don't you give us a little background of how you got into the political realm and just kind of stint in Washington, D.C., and just a little bit of your background.
Well, I got into politics because my ward chairman, Mary Berry, she knew me, and I was 19 and going to IUPUI because for my first semester, and she also happened to be a good friend of Jim Beatty's, and so that's how I got into it. Started out doing little volunteer things. The people had me making coffee for one of my first jobs, and I knew how to do it with a percolator, but not with an automatic coffee maker like they have now. Anyway, I broke the machine. And when I stirred in their coffee, there were all kinds of grounds in it. So I never had coffee duty again. So it was so I went on to bigger and better things like stuffing envelopes and going door to door, and all that.
Why don't you explain a little bit about going out to Washington, D.C.?
Okay. Well, my they redistricted, for the census in 1980, and my boss, Dave Evans, he was thrown into the same district as Andy. They had each had like separate sides of the city of Indianapolis, and then Dave also had some of the out counties. Um, but So when he lost in the primary, he ran against Andy. He offered me a chance to go to Washington, and I agreed to go. So, and that was how I ended up in Washington.
Then what were the
Um,
roles that you had out in Washington?
well, I was a legislative assistant for Dave out in Washington, and he had banking and several other uh, committee assignments, and I worked on things related to banking, and then his term expired, at the beginning of January. So Andy offered me a space in his office that I could work out of to try to find another job. And finally, he just decided to hire me with the help of a couple of people in the office who said we needed more help. And also, it was good because I was the only one in the office who actually was from Indianapolis and had some political experience. So I knew people who were coming into the office to meet with Andy. So that's how I got started with Andy.
Okay, so just kind of explain the transition of being connected with Andy and maybe a little bit about the House and Ways and Means Committee,
Mhm.
and then also the transition into the Social Security Administration, and then kind of bridge that to basically being connected with Jim and how you started interacting with Jim.
Okay. Well, I worked for Andy for several years, and then a position became available on the Ways and Means Committee. And he chaired the Social Security Subcommittee, and so I left his personal office and went down into the to the subcommittee office, but I was his person on the subcommittee. When you're in the majority on Ways and Means, at least it used to be that way, can't say for today, every subcommittee chairman had a person that they could put down on the subcommittee. And so he put me down there. Um, and and so I worked there for several years until the House went Republican, and then I came back up to his personal office. And then Andy retired in he in '96 he didn't run again. So as in '97 I needed a new job, and so I worked a little bit for the Arthritis Foundation, and then I someone told me about a position at Social Security Administration, the press secretary position, and they were having problems finding someone who had any knowledge at all about Social Security. So I applied for the job, and they hired me. But then I had to go through all the White House stuff of getting recommendations and submitting it to the White House Personnel Office, um, and so once I was cleared there, I worked at the Social Security Administration, and it did actually, my experience on Ways and Means did help me because a lot of the reporters knew me from Ways and Means, and they they felt like I actually knew what I was talking about, except, not just giving out blanket information or stonewalling. I actually knew what I was talking about. So that was very helpful to me.
And then what was the first connection or moment that you met Andy? Or excuse me, not Andy, when you got connected with Jim?
Well, I got connected with Jim pretty early on I would say in the 70s, because like I said, my ward chairman she was friends with Andy, and she was the secretary of his first campaign committee. And so they would get together, and I met him that way at some of the office functions, like they'd have an office Christmas party, or um, and and then if I took time off and came back for an election, the election night party was always at Jim and Phyllis's house.
And what year do you think that was when that started?
Um,
I guess.
when I knew him,
Yeah, when you first started being around Jim, like 72, 75, 78, what's approximate?
I would say maybe around 74, but then I went down to IU, and so I didn't see him much until after I started working for Andy, and that was in February of 82.
And so obviously you got to know Phyllis over the years as well. So let's talk about Phyllis for a little bit. Just kind of describe Phyllis, what she was like, and just some specific type of things that you really remember about her.
I think was one of the kind of people, not saying that right. She's one of the kindest people I've ever met. And maybe the kindest person I ever met. She was nice to people. She was very religious, and one of the few people who I could say actually lived her faith. She was a very good person, and she was fun to be around. She was, like I said, she's very kind, and and um, and I think she was fun. So that's what I was doing.
And how was their dynamic as a couple? How would you describe them as a couple?
I would say they were devoted to each other. Uh, he always, how do I say it? He was always very protective. Isn't quite the right word. They were in sync. Uh, he could talk, but she liked to visit with everyone. So we get at the table sometimes, and she, we would go into our personal lives talking a little bit, rather than just the politics where we had come for the Saturday lunch meetings that we went to.
So describe what you knew about Jim before in politics, before you really started to get to know Jim personally. Like, what did you hear about Jim, and what positions did you know about that he accomplished, like before, and then kind of leading up to when you started interacting with him?
Well, I knew of him in the 60s. He was, I think, the county chairman, and he had run for office, and and that's when I first got to know him. Not I didn't know him, but to hear of him, and and see some of the activities in the paper that he was involved in.
So as you started interacting with Jim, what were the kind of levels at that point of his political career?
Well, he was still very involved with Andy, but he also he was doing more legal work than political work at that time. He was no longer county chairman, and so we'd meet for lunch, he was always coming from his law office, and until he retired. Um, I thought he was very smart. And of course, one of the things when you're young is you don't want to say anything stupid, or you don't want to look like an idiot. And why I was so worried, I don't know, but it took me a while to feel comfortable enough to talk about politics and things with him. Mm.
So, what would you say would be some of the things you respect most about what he's accomplished throughout his political career, or just career in general? What are some of the things that stand out to you?
I think he has a lot of integrity as a person. And uh, I also think that he's quieter sometimes, but he listens. He's a good listener too. And that's one of the nice things about him that I like. And it wasn't long before I felt comfortable enough around him. Usually I would ask him questions, how he felt about the election, how he felt about things that were happening around the city or in Washington. And we would talk about things like that, especially around the table, because I really respected his opinion.
And so, I guess for specific stuff, is are there specific benchmarks that you know about his life that you like be able to mention that you just kind of learned about his accomplishments, things that stand out?
He has told some great stories, and I'm sure that you've heard them, and it's only made me really enjoy him um, more. But he's just had such a wide range of experiences, and I mean, even growing up, and he's, his career in the army. Uh, there's some interesting stories from that for sure. I'm sure you've heard them, and trying to think, he just has such a broad range of experience. He's met so many characters over the years, and he's a good, he takes things in. He is good about knowing what's going on around him, and just sort of quietly taking things in as they're happening.
So, explain to me some of the specific topics you guys cover when you have the meetings, and what are some of the things that have changed over the years? Like as far as like big moments, and you guys are discussing how it's going to affect the people, politics, society. What are some of those benchmark things that you've been able to discuss with those Saturday groups over the years that are some key things, and maybe his point of view on those key things?
Well, I would say since 2000, things have really changed in politics. And we just, over the years, we've talked about how to navigate some of the differences. And I'm trying to think of something that was really big. I wasn't here for 9/11. I was in Washington that day. Um, but other things are, we talk about different races and different people who are interested in being a candidate. Sometimes we've had people come by the lunches. People value his opinion, so they're thinking about running, or they may come by and talk to him. At least they, around the 2000s and the 80s, and 90s they did. Um, and I'm trying to think of anything big.
What
I
about
know
when Trump was elected in 16?
Oh Lord.
Like explain that a little bit, and points of view and that type of stuff, just how that was communicated around the table.
I think, like everyone else, we were shocked. I'm just shocked that Trump would win, that people would vote for him. I mean, the guy, with how many times has he declared bankruptcy, is supposed to be better on the economy, things that just didn't make sense. And, it's forced us to talk about what we've been missing as a party, things that we might do differently. And that was just, and I know it's been so upsetting to me, especially when you work in Washington like I did for so many years. And I felt really good about the things that I did. I felt like I had helped people in some way, whether it was at the Social Security Administration or on the Social Security subcommittee, or just in the personal office where you can help people. And so I felt really good about the things that I had accomplished in Washington. And it's very difficult to watch all of it just be, I want to say dissembled isn't even the right word, but just and the lack of value for things. People don't trust government, and I think there's several reasons. I've always thought that the 1980 1998 was then it then kind of the crash where people lost their homes, and uh, the economics. I always thought that because people didn't go to jail for that and regular people lost out, I always felt like that was kind of a trigger to some of the unhappiness that's going on.
So if you were going to describe how you've, let's say, evolved in your own political mindset, or what you've taken from Jim as far as positives to kind of give you new perspective, how would you describe Jim's influence on you?
Well, one of the things that I like about going up to visit with him on Saturdays is that sometimes I get really stressed out about things that Trump is doing or has done. And he's helped, I can talk to the group and him about how I'm feeling. Sometimes usually I'm not the only one who feels that way. Sometimes we can find the humor in things, which is also helpful to me. He's got a good sense of humor, Jim does. And so we can laugh about a lot of little things going on. And, Jim has seen so much in his life. I mean, he was a kid during the war. He's seen a lot of crises. He's, the Kennedy assassinations and Bobby Kennedy, um, the civil rights movement. He never really shied away from those things. I mean, he's a very open person for giving people opportunity, and um, so he, appreciated the significance of the civil rights movement. And
What
so
do you give him starting the first African American radio station in Indianapolis, WTLC?
right, exactly. So he saw a need in the community for that radio station, and so that was one of the things he did, was starting that station, which I always thought was pretty interesting, because Jim's just not one person. He's an attorney, doing real estate, or and he's also a lover of music. He's but he's involved in the community in a lot of ways that people had no idea that he was involved.
So if this is kind of a unique question, if you were to give Jim an experience anywhere on the planet, and health and money is no object, if it's in DC or something unique, where would you take him and what would you guys do?
Very interesting questions. Um, well, for one thing, I think I would take him, I would put him back in my time in DC and kind of walk him through some of the things that I saw going on, whether it was on the subcommittee or whether it was at Social Security Administration. He's very sort of a rational and reasonable person, and so and given his breadth of experience, he also just has great insight to what makes people tick, as well um, as what's going on in the world. So whether it's people in individually or people as a whole, he has kind of his good finger on what's going on in the world. As far as taking him somewhere else, oh, I'd have to think about that. Um,
It's whatever off the top of your head. Experience you guys know that you'd enjoy together and he'd enjoy.
well, if I were gonna, you know, I think we could go to New York and hit some Broadway, and that would be fun. Um, I'm trying to think what I actually have seen him, because he is often down in Florida when I go with my friend Nancy in January. And so I've seen him down in Florida. And honestly, when he gets back to Indianapolis, he always looks better and feels better. I think that the time he spends in Florida is good for him. So I
Now,
would say that.
and you've gotten to know, I would say, the family a little bit, and Lynn and possibly the kids. But how would you describe Lynn? What do you think about Lynn and how their comparison with Lynn and Jim?
Well, I really don't know Jay. That's his son, right? Yeah, that's Jay. I don't really know Jay all that well, although I've met him and seen him at I'd say funerals, actually. Um, Lynn seems to be pretty dynamic in that she's always busy organizing everything. Jim will say he has an idea about something, and then she'll kind of run with it before Jim really realizes that, what might have been amusing was was actually being put into motion. So that's kind of interesting. I mean, she's organized his care, and I think she in of herself is an interesting person. I wouldn't call her quiet, but uh, there's a different energy when she is around, I would say.
Sure. So, in closing, and obviously Jim's birthday is coming up, what would you like to say to Jim directly?
For his birthday,
Well, just in general, what would you like to say to Jim directly?
I would say I hope he has many more birthdays. I think the world is a better place when he's here. So I would like to see him get a few more years in. So happy birthday, Jim.
That is beautiful. All right, we're gonna close this out, but it was very nice seeing you today, and I'm glad that you're still able to spend time with Jim and have all these great political conversations over on those Saturdays over at Jim's place.
Yeah. Yes, I enjoy them, and I think Jim doesn't really get out, and so I know he looks forward to the Saturdays, because people come in and then he gets to talk about all kinds of things. And like I said, he's more than just about politics. So we'll talk about a lot of different things.
Right. Well, thank you for your time today, Cathy, and I hope you have a beautiful day.
Great. Thank you.